I'm Rob Port from SayAnythingBlog.com. I wanted to talk a little bit about North Dakota's economy and the economy of the Midwest. And I have on the line with me Professor Ernie Goss. He is the McAllister Chair and Professor of Economics at Creighton University in Nebraska. And he does a regular Midwest economic survey, which is always very telling and illuminating about the things that are going on in the Midwest. Professor Goss, first of all, thanks for your time, and I wanted to ask you a question because I was reading an article in the Associated Press about your most recent survey, and the headline said that even North Dakota is dropped in your economic index, and that's not something that North Dakotans are used to hearing of late. We've had a lot of wonderful things happening in the state. What's making North Dakota's economic index drop?
Well, as you say, Rob, the index has dropped, but it's still at a pretty good level. This is a leading economic indicator based upon surveys of supply managers, much like it's identical to the National ISM Institute for Supply Management survey that comes out first business day of every month, and ours comes out first business day of every month. And North Dakota's has been coming down a bit, but still is the strongest in the 9-state region that we survey. We survey and been surveying this region since 1994. That would be North Dakota and Minnesota in the north. You go right down the middle of the country to Arkansas and Oklahoma in the south, and we've been doing it since 1994. And North Dakota, as most of your listeners would understand, has been the bright spot in the regional economy, and for that matter, the U.S. economy, since the recession. North Dakota has a record number of workers working today in the state, and that's likely to expand. But as you said, I think at least our indications are that the growth is going to slow down, and that's a lot to do with skill shortages, worker shortages, and also housing shortages in the state of Oklahoma right now. I say Oklahoma, North Dakota. Sorry.
So a lot of those things just have to do with just the fact that North Dakota can't find enough workers, can't find enough skilled workers, and things like that. And also, I mean, because this is a problem that we've been facing for a while. If you find workers, you get them here, they got to live somewhere too. Recently we had news that Menards is flying in retail workers from Wisconsin to work in Minot, North Dakota, just because they can't find enough workers locally. So you're saying that's primarily the cause, is we're running up against labor shortages and housing shortages?
It's part of it, Rob. There's other part that's having less of an impact is the global economic slowdown is putting a little bit of downward pressure on energy prices and the energy sector. So the energy sector is just not growing now like it did, say, 6 months ago, but it's still growing. And today, of course, we hear rumblings of the export of liquefied natural gas, LNG, and of course that would have a real big stimulative impact on the energy sector, and would ripple back, of course, to North Dakota, and for that matter, other states in the region that we survey, and of course other states that have that produce energy products.
I was reading in the Associated Press report that I was reading, you said that part of the reason why also was some of the economic outlook, some of the uncertainty about what's going on, obviously with the fiscal negotiations at the federal level in Congress, and also the implementation of a healthcare law, the Affordable Care Act, quote unquote Obamacare, which obviously has a lot of regulations and that are going to have impacts on how businesses do their business. Those are obviously having an impact. Can you maybe shed a little light on the sort of impact that's having at this point?
Well, we're in, of course, a period of uncertainty. That's nothing new, but the degree of uncertainty has increased fairly significantly, as you're saying, Rob. And we don't have, well, we do have a confidence index which sort of tracks that. Confidence index plunged for the month of November, and I moved below growth neutral. Now, all these numbers stretch between 0 and 100. 50 is growth neutral. Anything below 50 is, of course, contraction. And that moved below growth neutral. That's the confidence index looking out 6 months. And that was driven a lot by what the physical, I'm reluctant to use the term cliff, but I guess everyone knows what that is. And as you're saying, healthcare reform, and that was also, we saw the supply managers provide us with comments, and there were a lot of comments about healthcare reform and the taxes that are going to be implemented January 1 to support healthcare reform. Because we're told, incorrectly told, that, well, if you'll just let us have those, go back to the Clinton era taxes. Well, you're not going back to the Clinton era taxes. You're going out back to the Clinton era taxes plus taxes brought about because of healthcare reform. So it's not entirely accurate. I think another inaccurate point provided by, well, in this case, the administration side, they say, well, we need these taxes on the well-to-do to reduce the deficit. Well, it only brings down the deficit by about 10% or less. In other words, we need more than what either side is proposing, and that's not unusual, of course, coming from Washington.
The argument that we've heard sometimes from the other side of that debate, from the Democrat side of that debate, is that there's concern about cuts in federal spending. Their argument is that government spending has a stimulative effect on the economy, and their contention is that businesses are worried about those cuts as well. Is that something that you've seen in your survey? Concern that the government's going to cut back on some funding that may be beneficial for some of these businesses?
Well, Rob, I'm sure it is the case for some industries, but I would just use, well, how's that working out for you there, this government spending? I mean, in other words, we've been over $1 trillion in deficit spending every year, has not stimulated the economy, has produced more uncertainty, but given the acts that's about to take place, and I would argue, yes, that would have some impacts. In other words, we do need the government spending to be pared back, but I use the term pared, not axed. In other words, the fiscal cliff, of course, the bill was passed so that the pain would be so great January 1 that something would be passed. Well, now the pain is so great, but it's not clear that we're going to have anything passed. And so there would be some cuts. There would be significant cuts across. Now, it wouldn't be immediate. So the impacts in the terms of the cuts would not be immediate. They would be across the year 2013, and a lot to do with defense and a lot to do with Medicaid.
What do you think the best route forward would be for, I guess, both the national economy and the Midwest economy coming out of, the quote unquote fiscal cliff, for lack of a better term, for the negotiations going on D.C.? I mean, is the sequestration? Is that what's best for the country, or
Rob? Yeah, my father, who did not graduate from college, he grew up in the Depression. He doesn't have a high school diploma. He knows what the solution is. I know what the solution is. Everyone knows what the solution is. It's health. It's reform. We're talking about tax reform, and that's what we need to see. In other words, something like Simpson-Bowles. This idea that somehow we can raise taxes on this group and there's just not enough money there in terms of the wealthy, that we can cut spending like that. What we need is taxes rates to come down. That would be, that would be fair, and then have them broaden the base. In other words, we're all going to lose. We're all going to pay part of the price. And again, Simpson-Bowles is a great step in that direction. The president appointed Simpson-Bowles the commission. Then he ran away from it. The Republicans ran away from it. Now everybody's coming back to it, sort of, and they're coming back to it as if they're going to embrace it. Once that's not likely. I mean, I think, but that's what we do need: fundamental tax reform, income tax reform, federal income tax reform.
What do you think the trend is going to be for the Midwest economy going forward? We had actually a little bit in your latest report, had a little bit of an improvement. Are we going to see fluctuation? Are we going to see gradual improvement? Or are we going to see a decline?
It's going to be slower growth, Rob. In other words, it's still going to be positive. This is probably one of the best places it's going to be the best place in the nation to do business over the next decade. Now, the next few months are going to be bumpy and rocky, and we're seeing some real issues out there. And one of them, Rob, you and I haven't talked about today, is drought. The drought is, and it's not as much of, it's not, we're not seeing that in North Dakota to any great extent, but you move south to South Dakota, move to Nebraska, Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, particularly Arkansas, Oklahoma, real drought conditions, and how that'll play out in the economy in the months ahead, because we're still not seeing any moisture here to any great extent anywhere for that matter, anywhere in the 9-state region that we're talking about.
Professor Goss, thank you for your time.
All right, good to talk to you. Good to be with you, Rob. Thanks.